Yeah.
3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Lightforge. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merps, and we have ADWCTA back from his 2-week vacation in China and Mongolia. Welcome back. How's it
Thank
going?
you. Thank you. I've gained 5 pounds officially over the course of two
Uh-huh.
weeks, which means it was a very successful 2 weeks.
Well, that
That's how you measure success, by pounds gained. Whenever you're losing weight, that's a failure.
yeah, I know. You ate a lot of good food, which you tweeted out. And I'm sure you ate even more good food that you didn't tweet out. So it seems like a very successful trip. But you're back. You've played a little bit of Arena, and we're going to talk about both of our experiences as well as some stats today,
Yeah,
right?
so I don't know if you knew this, but wild cards are back in the arena now.
It is. We talked about this last
Mm-hmm.
week while you were in China.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the food has just made you forget about our 2-hour conversation last time.
Nope, don't remember. Too early. Way too
All
early.
right.
Like, woke up in the middle of the dark. It's like, so Mongolia is like right next to Siberia, which is pretty far up north. So it's just like dark at like 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. or whenever we were recording this. It's just me sitting in the dark with like a light on and my family thinking I'm absolutely crazy. And us keep making motions to my grandma to not enter the living room, which is where the phone
Yep.
is.
Yeah. Sounds good. It was fine. I will say I'm not looking forward to the next Lightforge podcast from around the world, but that was for what we had to do. I think it went fairly well. So you're back. We have gone through one entire week of Wild Arena, and we have 2 more weeks to go. Right?
Okay, so I've played exactly one run in Wild Arena since I've been back. It was early
Hmm.
this morning at 4 a.m., which is when I wake up now. I go to bed at 1 a.m. and I wake up at 4 a.m. Then I go to bed at 1 p.m. and I wake up at 4 p.m. It's my new schedule. Hashtag jet lag. And this is my impression about Wild Arena so far. One, I don't know why, but I'm actually getting destroyed, and this is a one-run sample size, so take it for what it's worth. I'm getting destroyed by more ridiculous decks than even before Wild, which I would not have actually expected. Um, one memorable deck had two. What do you call those things?
Cards.
Dragonfire potions.
I was correct.
One psychic scream and two mind controls. That was a fun opponent. So that's happening, and also Curvestone's back. So those are my only two observations on the meta, and I will leave the rest to you.
Yeah. So anyways, we're going to talk about this, but we're not going to do like the super deep dive and like analysis that we need to do because it is only a 3-week event. However, I do agree. So here is the thing about Wild Arena. Number one, and this is what most people have anecdotally stated, this is not one of those events where new players or very inconsistent arena players flood back into the arena, right? Because this is not an arena event and they didn't give away free tickets. This is just a wild event. Like the theme is wild. This is the event. So constructed players don't really have, constructed players slash casual players don't really have the incentive to go into wild unless they want to play wild arena. So that's number one. It's not like in some past events, like the dual class arenas, in which they gave out a free ticket, and you're just like, man, I cruise my way to
Yeah,
7 wins, right? And then after that, it's like, okay, well, these guys, I guess, kind of know what they're doing after like your 6, 7 wins. And for the first like couple of days of arena, that was the case. Like you were almost guaranteed to go like 5 to 7 wins without like getting a loss. Essentially, that is definitely not the case here. I think a lot of people have made that observation. Number two, I think you're correct. Curve stone. And I kind of hate using that word because it's kind of a loaded word, right?
oh, they
But
mean it like Curvestone is bad because all you need is a curve and you
yeah,
win. But when I say Curvestone, I mean it's like good because now there's structure to the arena. It's not about who gets the best cards.
Right. And I think it's important that we define it, right? Because curvestone is used sometimes as like a mocking, sort of sarcastic word. But yeah, curve, I guess, is back. It is more common to see the one drop into the two drop, and the snowball is a little bit easier as well because the wild one drops and two drops were often like
Mm-hmm.
quite good,
Mm-hmm.
powerful either in stats like zombie chow or haunted creeper, or they had like additional abilities like a stone splinter trog, which has a small ability but can be useful, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or something like a mech warper, which has a conditional, synergistic ability, but also can be quite good if paired up. Like it's these low drops with upside, or just low drops with a ton of stats. So yeah, that is definitely back. And I also agree with your third point, which is you see some crazy stuff. You see some crazy stuff, and it's crazy stuff that number one, you have no reason to play around, so you're not playing
Oh
around.
yeah, remember our discussion last week? Like, there's not that
Mhm.
much stuff you actually should play around. It was like
No,
focused on not playing around stuff, even though you may want to.
right. And here's the thing, right? Your basic fundamental skills are still there, and you're going to rely on them more than ever,
Yes.
right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you drop something big, they don't take care of it, or they bump all of their minions into it. You can feel confident dropping like your Iron Bark Protector, right? Or you can feel confident dropping like your Bot Creeper and being like, okay, well, unless he top decks something, he shouldn't be able to deal with it because otherwise, why would he bump like his three minions into it and then just play something like mediocre,
Okay,
right?
so you've been in this meta for a while. More removals or fewer removals?
I would say fewer removals, mostly because it's and when we're talking about removals, we're talking about like mostly like initiative spell stuff, right?
Yeah,
Like
spells, weapons, your bomb lobber.
yeah, I would say probably a little bit less,
Mm-hmm.
but the snowball is
Mm-hmm.
more prevalent. So if it's like removal in terms of like like if we're not counting buffs, then I would say like less, right? But if we're counting sort of snowball mechanics and everything, I would say it's probably around the same, mostly just because of the uptick in paladins and their ability to remove now. And a lot of it depends on them having something out there, right? For Keeper of Oldemon, for the Lightforge Stegodon, and so on and so forth. So because Paladin has kind of become the king of Wild Arena and kind of the boogeyman, they can definitely remove, but not in like a mage or a priest way, you know?
Yeah, like one thing I've noticed is removals are down.
Yeah.
Like from your hand dealing with the board, removals are down. They were at a probably like an all-time high rate beforehand. Um, so adding a bunch of the wild cards in, and you were right about this because you were talking about this even before, and I was a little bit skeptical in terms of offering rates and how the new cards coming in, even though like right, the spell bonus is still there, the weapon bonus is still there in terms of the offering rates, they're just like
Right.
not as good, and so you'll just see fewer of them. And I think that's definitely very visible, and that assists the snowball. Like one thing I had in my deck was a Koto Rider, and the Koto Rider never got killed. Anytime I
Yeah.
played the Koto Rider onto an empty board, I won every single game that happened. Why? Because it has 5 health, and if you just like bait your opponent a little bit beforehand, because there's not that many big things anymore, so it's easier to bait stuff out too. Like they just won't remove your next stuff. So the lack of removals is definitely like a thing. Not that there are no removals anymore, but if you drop your cards with initiative down from like 10 to 12 to like 8 to 10, that's a pretty big difference because you're only going to see like half your cards in any game on average. So that's like
Right.
4 to 5 removals over the course of a game, which you can kind of start like counting and looking at their hand for.
Yeah, generally, if you look at the trend that spells have gone since we've moved from wild to the standard format, most spells, if you average them out over the classes, have been more powerful, but also higher in mana cost, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and this is pretty much true for all the classes. Like, now, like for you can think of some of these spells for each of the classes. For Warlock, it's like Doom, right?
Mm,
For Mage, it's like Meteor. With Priest, it's like, Free from Amber. It's the Psychic Screams and all that. Even for Hunter, Call of the Wild, Crushing Walls. Like for all of the classes, Blizzard has, they recognize sort of the danger of cheap tempo, right?
yes.
And they've identified, it's like, okay, one of the ways we can make the game still kind of like powerful and crazy is to like make sure that that powerful effect is a little bit later on in the game. And we still need to make it powerful enough to heavily impact the game, but you have more turns now, right? And then it's one of the philosophies that they seem to be really pushing, and it was like one of the quote mistakes that they previously made. So yeah, this is something that we see quite often now, where they want big cards to have big swings, but at a cost of not being able to play them early. So yeah, I think reintroducing all the small cards, like, or sorry, the wild cards, you see that they're small, they're tempo efficient, and sometimes extremely tempo efficient, like power overwhelming, right?
Hmm.
But yeah, they definitely do suffer from just being smaller spells on average than the spells that we have in standard.
Yep. Um, yeah, so that's kind of a big picture view of what's going on in Wild right now. If you haven't had a chance to step in and take a look at yourself, it's very noticeable. The meta is definitely different. You'll feel it in like a couple games. This is not the KNC meta, and we didn't expect it to be. So let's talk about win rates,
Let's.
because I think, and I'll posit my theory about it in a bit, but I'm pretty sure there's no micro adjust going on right now for the new stuff. Like none of the wild cards right now are being micro adjusted. There's just not enough time for them to do that, and so a lot of the and if you were looking at win rates before in KNC, Blizzard had kind of balanced it so that all the classes were getting basically within like plus minus 2-3% of 50%. And when a class was like a little bit above it, like I think Priest was 52.5% at some point, like Blizzard even eventually nerfed them. So in Wild, that's not true anymore because they just added a whole bunch of cards in and they haven't micro adjusted stuff again.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely feels that way. And I would be really surprised if they did micro adjust anytime in the middle. That just
Mm-hmm.
kind of doesn't make sense, right? It's like whatever problems there are, I think it's just not worth it to fix it and then just add more work for Blizzard,
Yeah.
sort of spawn more confusion for the player base,
And plus,
right?
once they balance something, it may like unbalance something else, right? Like there's just not enough
Right.
time to like tinker with it. So
Right.
what are the best classes in WoW right now?
Well, if you look at HS replay, and I don't have the stats in front of me, so, but Paladin is kind of in a clear, like, is in a tier clearly by itself. Paladin is sporting a 54% win rate, which is like, not like the highest historically we've ever seen,
Mm-hmm.
but 54% win rate,
Significant
um,
advantage.
significant advantage. It basically means if you are trying to get leaderboard for Wild, by the way, which is only 10 runs in Wild.
It's gonna be more
So
than 11 wins per run. Number one.
I think so because in 10 runs, like, can you basically get Paladin like 8 out of the 10 runs? Yeah, you can. Can you high roll those 10 runs as well? Yeah, I think you can.
And by you,
Um,
we don't mean any specific person, but like of the like 100 people like really tryharding and really good at the arena, like one of them will
right.
put
And
together a 10 run stretch.
Right. And this isn't even like it's not a 30 run commitment, which requires like a big chunk of time. This is 10 runs in which if you have 2 good days, you could grind it out,
Yeah.
right? So I do expect the win rate to be quite high. And we'll see. It's going to be 10 runs for February, probably 10 runs for March as well.
No, no,
During the
15 runs for February,
Oh, it's
15 runs
15.
for March, 10 runs for the event.
Right, 10 runs for the event. Oh, yeah, yeah, the event itself is. I thought they were dividing the event by February and March as well. But it's just 10 runs for the event, right?
Yes.
Okay, yep, that's my bad. But yeah, for like basically for this event, I'm expecting like just true craziness, and I think the top 10 will all be easily above like 9 or 9.5. So
Yep.
yeah.
And if you guys are wondering about the other win rates, besides Paladin being number one, and then one of the things we keep saying about Paladin is just because Paladin has a win rate of number one doesn't mean it's really that lopsided for good players. Just because it's one of the easier to play classes, it's pretty obvious usually what you're supposed to do as a Paladin, which is get on the board and then buff your stuff. So it's not that, it's really not like terribly lopsided. I know people have bad experiences, but you have bad experiences against like all other classes too sometimes. I know I still like met up with like a ridiculous priest, right, my first run. So that's Paladin. Any other like notable classes besides warrior sucking? Like everybody thought they would still suck.
Well, my prediction that hunters would be good is completely wrong because as of the win rates, I remember they were the second worst class, right?
Mm-hmm.
And kind of like closer to warrior than sort of the third to worst class, which I don't remember what it
Shaman.
was. Shaman, yeah, okay.
So why like?
Yeah.
Is it just the win rates? Are people like playing Hunter wrong, or is Hunter actually like not a good class right now?
All right, so all right, let's talk about this because I have been playing Hunter quite a lot, right? I've been trying to make it work. I think my runs went like 9 wins, 8 wins, like 5 wins, 3 wins, 1 win, and then like 5 again. I don't exactly remember, and there might have been like one or two that I missed because I've actually been playing like a decent amount of Wild Arena off stream. It's just been fun. It's just been cool seeing the cards. But my overall win average is not that high. My win rate for Paladin is like 12 wins, 10 wins, and I'm in the middle of a run right now. It's kind of stupid. Obviously, smaller sample size, but the success has been there. So here's what was wrong with Hunter. Let's go back to like 2 podcasts ago when I was like, I think Hunter has been good. And the basis for my assumption was number one, whenever there is a shift in a meta, Hunter usually is able to take advantage, right? Because people just sort of go with cards that they're more comfortable with, like more, they don't really know about like cohesiveness of a deck. So they just go with good cards. And while doing that, you typically give up, like I said, cohesiveness, and you also give up curve. And also number two, I'm like, wait, we're getting a lot of these really good early game cards.
Yes.
Like you get the Hunter Creepers back, you get a lot of the the 1-drops, you get Glaive Zuka back, right? That's just like a world beater. And it's true, you do get the Hunter Creepers back, you do get the Glaive Zukas back, you get all the stuff back. But I mean, so does everyone else, right? And it's all a little bit relative. And here's the one thing I've noticed: like, what made hunters successful previously? And it was sort of number one, the lack of taunts that are now very prevalent, and Blizzard has just been printing tons of them ever since we've moved to standard. And it's part of their philosophy of like, let's make sure players don't win immediately, right? Like they remember the face hunter meta of constructed, which span like an entire year, right? They remember their mistakes with hunter, they remember their mistakes with face shaman, and they're just like, okay, we have to prevent this. And a couple ways to prevent it are like AoE spells and taunts, right? So you have your Tar Creepers now, you have your nesting rocks now, and stuff that like stops hunters from just like going face, right? And losing just a little bit of value. You have like a decent amount of heals now for quite a few classes. And you also have a lot of the neutral heals back, right? People are drafting like Antique Heal Bot, which makes me really, really salty because I totally forget about that card and suddenly like 8 heal. So they have that. And, but I think one of the main reasons is just Hunter's always like historically had a bad matchup against paladins, right? Like in which paladins always sort of challenge hunters to get out onto the board a little bit faster. And sometimes hunters are able to do it, sometimes not. But right now,
And paladins heal themselves.
and paladins heal themselves as well. And with paladins, it's sort of like if they get onto the board first, it's over. Like it's just so hard for the hunter to come back after that. And if you look at wild paladin, geez, the snowball is so real. Like they have equal chances to draft the neutral early cards, but paladins have more plentiful early cards and better early cards. And that's really the problem. Like, yeah, Hunter, you have your Glaivezuka, but Paladins have, they're able to start off with Lost in the Jungle, Righteous Protector, go into Shielded Minibot, go into Argent Protector, go into Argent Lance on turn 3, Muster for Battle, Coghammer, Seal of Champs. Like, if you look at all the power plays starting on turn 1 that the Paladin has and the amount of tempo that they can gain due to these cards, it's kind of insane. Like you're not able to match that with the hunter. And then if you can't win the early game as the hunter, you can't win. And then even if you are sort of staying even, you get into these turns in which you're like, do I clear the 1/1 or do I go face? Like I might have to go face in order to win, but just by giving them the 1/1, I potentially give them the steed. I give them this or that. And you're just faced with all of these like issues, even if you're just like neck and neck with the paladin. So hunter's really bad again, like right now against the paladin matchup, and very sadly, there have always been matchups in which hunter has a clear advantage, and one of them is the warlock. Like the hunter versus warlock matchup, if you know how to play hunter, and if you make the right decisions, it's such a lopsided matchup because like you just take away the warlock hero power. And these days, unfortunately, because of cards like Vulgar Homunculus, which is a really good tempo in turn 2, and the Spellstone, which is activated off of Kobold Librarian, Vulgar Homunculus, which are really good tempo cards, and basically all of their like Hellfires and Dread Infernal, Fellfire, all that stuff. If they like Spellstone a big threat that you put out, it's kind of GG. Like even if they activate the Spellstone just once, 4 mana to deal 5 damage and heal 5, you kind of can't account for that. That's like the face healing is just a little bit too much. And then they get another heal or another taunt after that. And if you get them really low, they drop the Fell, like the what was it? It's not Fell Reaver, because Hooked Reaver, sorry. They dropped the Hooked Reaver, which is a 4 mana 7/7 taunt, and then like it's like you've used all of your resources just to be like, okay, like one final gasp, let's go. And then they drop a 4 mana 7/7 taunt. You're like, all right, well, I lose now. It's just it's a hard life for a hunter these days. I
wanna bring up like a point between the hunter and the warlock, because warlock right now has actually the second highest win rate. And the question that I start out with is, what's different about warlock and hunter? They both don't have an early game that can compete with the paladin right now, and they both have a similar type of early game, in terms of just like they drop some 1-drops and some 2-drops, and that's kind of all they have, right? So the difference is card advantage. And the warlock is trying to secure the board whether it succeeds or not and win on card advantage, and the hunter is trying to secure the board whether they win or not and then hit face a couple times. And when you're facing the paladin, that 1/1 that you were talking about, how the paladins keep generating a 1/1 and then you need to clear it and it wastes an attack, that doesn't hurt the warlock, because that's what the warlock wants to do anyway. It destroys the hunter. Like, those 1/1s, when a paladin has them and you don't have a read that they don't have a buff, those 1/1s might as well have taunt on them. Because you can't get into a situation where you let the paladin buff something and it totally flips the board unless you can finish them off in a turn or two. So it forces you to delay your actual attacks on the face in favor of clearing. Like, this is Curvestone, remember. And in Curvestone, you clear a lot. And you clear a lot in Curvestone because you get punished pretty heavily when you don't clear in Curvestone. So all of that is working against the hunter, whereas a very similar class that has a very similar, actually worse success rate at having the early board against the paladin, the warlock, is actually doing totally fine.
Yeah, I mean, well, part of the reason is just because Warlock has tons of like ways to clear, right? They have
Yeah.
a
I mean,
very good amount.
they're not like an
Yeah,
aggro class necessarily, right? They're zoo
no,
slash
definitely
like
not.
control. They have the whole card advantage deal, both in zoo and in control. Um, but like, what was I saying? Yeah. So when it comes to dealing with the wild meta that's happening right now, like something to keep in mind that I've also noticed is that the games, like it is Curvestone, but the games go on for longer than I thought they would. Like I don't think the length of the game has changed as much as I thought it would. It's still one of the like slowest metas that I've ever been in, even though the curve is back. You would think the curve is back, someone will overrun someone else on the curve, and then it's done. But it's more like TGT, where maybe the game is determined by turn like 7, but the game's gonna last until turn 15 because it's just one player repeatedly securing the board, and then the other player either can't do anything about it or they flip the board like way later on. But in either case, there's so much board clearing going on that no one's actually like able to hit face without getting punished significantly.
I agree with this. I think, yeah, a lot of times in games, it's like, uh, and because I've typically been playing the classes which try to put the pressure on,
Mm-hmm.
right? And sometimes I'll play the priest that sort of just like punts and punts and punts and tries to like, get some card advantage here, card advantage there, and then like sort of choke them of their resources. But I typically am playing the more aggressive class, and it'll be me trying to like set up a threat, right? Like a threatening board, and be like, how do you respond? They'll respond either in the very next turn or just set up for like something afterwards, right? And then I'll set up again, and I'll set up again, and always being aware that I can't like go all in, all in. And most of the time I'm right because they clear it. But yeah, it's absolutely correct because of sort of the new cards that have come out. And the meta hasn't like dramatically changed. It's changed a decent amount, but it hasn't dramatically changed. Um, you essentially have to keep on like presenting a threat, keep on presenting a threat, and then saying, "Do you have an answer?" And it's it's quite rare for them not to be able to clear your board the first time or even the second time, right? It's like the third or fourth time in which you're trying to challenge and say, it's like, okay, do you have this? Like, are you still able to clear, or am I able to get enough damage? And sometimes yes, sometimes no, but it does cause the games to go on for much, much longer. And I remember previous to that, it would just be like, okay, they were saving their one heart removal, right? Or they were
Mm-hmm.
saving their one excavated evil or something. You get past that, you're pretty much like in the clear. Or you get past their like flame strike, right? You're pretty much in the clear. And there's minion on minion battles in which if you just trade well and everything, you win. That's definitely not the case now. Like you face a ton of warlocks in which I face like a quadruple spellstone warlock that also had like fellfire and hellfire and like double defile, and like I just had to like grind that out. In which I ultimately did win that because at the end he just like took too many spells, but it was like really, really close, right? And I just couldn't kill him either because all those spellstones kept on healing him. So yeah, you do get very, very, very lengthy games now. But I guess I mind this a little bit less. Maybe it's because I don't care about Wild Arena as much, but it's also like because the game does start a little bit early, right?
Yeah,
It's
it
kind of
starts immediately.
right. It's always a little bit frustrating when like on turn like in the previous meta, like this is not unheard of, right? It's like pass, pass, hero power,
Mm-hmm.
like dagger, and then someone will play like a Stonehill defender, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then Rogue would like finally play the first like threat of the game, which is like a Hildnir Frost Rider, and then the game kind of begins, right? Like I think that. And now it's like you do see the zombie chows in turn one. If someone doesn't play like a 2-drop, you're just like, wow, what happened? You don't have a
Yeah,
two. Like
everyone
it's
has it
it's
too.
honestly very surprising.
Yep. Um, So I mean, it's a different meta. I think when it comes to Hunter, if you want to like, try to make Hunter work, you do the same thing that you was making Hunter work in KNC, right? Like you got to go a little slower, and then you got to take a lot of risk. Like you really do
Yeah.
have to go for the face, even though you will be punished a lot. So like make sure, but what I always do with Hunter is you start going face when you're about to run out of cards, and don't feel pressure to go face before then if you're facing a class that can buff, especially, or like heal or something. So um yeah. I don't know if there's anything to say about the other classes right now. Do you like have any class that you want to like talk about in particular? I think Hunter and Paladin are the biggest movers.
Yeah, so here's the thing I want to say like historically, whenever there's been a paladin meta, rogue
Hmm.
has been sort of like the counter to it, right?
Yes.
And it goes back to just the basics of rogue's hero power is like twice the paladin hero power,
Hmm.
kind of, right?
It's just
And
it's a
also
very efficient way to clear the Paladin hero power.
very efficient way, and also rogues have tempo efficient removals, right? And not just hard removals, like they steed, you sap, right? But the rogues have been having a bit of trouble, mostly just because like paladins have gotten so fast, right? Like they're
Hmm.
able to really get out there, and with the neutral, drops, sort of like flooding the pool of cards, it's like haunted creepers help paladins out a lot more than haunted creepers help out rogues,
Yep.
right?
Because rogues have a
Zombie chows,
dagger. Like
yeah,
whenever you add 2 drops of the game, that's not good for rogue.
no, no. And whenever you start the game on one, the potential, like if we can store up the potential for that zombie chow to help snowball, it helps out the paladin more than it helps out the rogue.
Hmm.
So with all these things, it's like, and look, this will be different from person to person. I've heard it like both ways, but I think commonly a lot of people have been a little bit surprised about it's like, well, it's like if paladins are really good, I should be able to counter with rogues,
Mm.
but it's just not there.
This
You
is
can
not a
certainly do well
rogue
with
like
rogues. Yeah,
meta. Like this
yeah,
is, uh, yeah. Like
yeah.
rogue doesn't always counter paladin. It counters paladin in the long term, and it counters paladin in slow games. This is
Right,
not one of those like kind of situations. Especially because a lot of the cards for rogue requires them to use their face. Like a lot of the cards for rogue.
right.
And so you're gonna have to like heal your face up and then hit people, and you sometimes run out of like steam to be able to keep clearing the 1/1s even, without like having it actually matter, right? Because above a certain amount of health, clearing the 1/1s doesn't matter at all. You just free clears, but past a certain amount of health, then yeah, they're still dealing 1 damage to you. That's significant. Uh,
Yeah. And I will say, I guess like this is where the error in my analysis, because I did not like say before Water Rage dropped, I'm like, unequivocally, Paladin will be like the number one class, right?
Well, you can't
Um,
predict any of this stuff because of like
and
this is micro adjust world now, right? Like we
right,
have very
right.
accurate pinpoint predictions when there's no micro adjust. Once there is micro adjust, it's what's Blizzard doing. Like one of the big things that has happened is in terms of when we went into Wild, KNC still has its offering bonus.
Yeah, it
And
does.
that actually messes up a lot of things because that's a very significant like addition
Yeah.
to the offering pool, and that changes the whole entire meta. And
Well,
so
it's also keeping priests like
yeah,
afloat, right?
exactly. And for these kinds of things, like this wasn't announced, no one really knew one way or the other. We did our analysis as if there was no offering bonus because you think wild, right? Like, and also Blizzard traditionally took away the set offering bonus at around this time. But that's not the case here. There is a set offering bonus, and that messes up. Like, I mean, it's a meta. It's a sensitive thing. Like, we can be precise about it, but we need to know the rules of the game, and we didn't until the game was already out. And I mean, we still don't know the very precise ones, but what I assume is happening is whatever prior micro adjust had been in the arena is still in there for the non-wild cards, for the standard cards, and for the wild cards there are no micro adjusts, and there is still the set bonus going on here. So it's a little bit of a different meta than we imagined. And if you look at like all of our comments here about like, oh, the game could potentially be a little slower, but the curve is back, like that's all because of what Blizzard did. Like that's because we're not in a true like wild anything goes meta. We're in a, if this is a KNC like expansion release, but Arena had never gone standard kind of meta. Which is why it's a little slower, which is why like pushing works a little less well, because there was a lot of heals in the latest expansion. And when you're like looking at what you could potentially do and how you're potentially drafting, like really keep this in mind. We are still in the KNC meta. We're in the KNC wild meta. We're not in like the wild meta the way like you may think of like a totally neutral wild meta.
It's a good way to put it.
This is the KNC wild meta. There is still a heavy KNC element to it.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I guess for this meta, sort of, just for my own sake and seeing where my prediction went wrong, why it went wrong, because this has been a tough one to predict mostly. And we usually like get it like fairly correct, but this was a tough one just because we didn't know what the offering rate was going to be ahead of time, and it's sort of a chain reaction, right? Where
that's how the meta works.
Yeah,
like that's how the entire meta works. Like I think we made great predictions for the meta that for the offering rates that we thought were going to be in the arena, and that wasn't the offering rate that actually was in the arena. So then everything's wrong, right?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. It's just tough to figure it out because of the information that we're given nowadays. But I would just say I'm really sad. I was hoping that hunters would be, like at least mid-tier slash, maybe like, top 3.
Yeah.
But oh man, it's really not the case. If you look at the win rate there, it's fairly close to Warrior. It's still not Warrior, but it's just like, oh man, really bad. And when I play Hunter as well, there is not a single class in which I feel good against now. It's so bad. I go up against Warlocks, I'm like, well, they can blow me out in the early game, or they can just heal a ton. And it's just, you feel so powerless because your hero power does nothing in the early game. And now going up against Warlocks, I feel powerless as well. And geez, like, don't wake me up from this nightmare, man.
Yeah, you'll wake up in 2 weeks, and then you'll be back in the old meta where Hunter is amazing, right? Like,
yeah,
like the normal KNC meta where you play every single card in your deck. Yeah. Okay, so I think that covers Wild Arena pretty well in terms of what you see out there, in terms of how you're supposed to like gauge yourself. Like it's a long ride, but have your curve. Try to snowball. Snowball's very effective right now. Think about card advantage and not just tempo, but like curve plus card advantage is the way I'm going to describe it. And trade, always trade. You'll notice your opponent trading. You should be the one trading too. It's a very trade heavy, drawn out kind of meta with a curve stone attached to it in the beginning. And conversely, obviously you're drafting almost all the removals you're going to get, but save a removal in your hand because you don't want your opponent to snowball. Like, make sure that every removal you use is being used on a minion with an ability, or a minion with like an insanely high attack and low health, right? Like, get value out of your removals. If you can trade on the board, trade on the board. If you can like deal with stuff, deal with stuff. Like, your removals are what's going to win you the game, and you got to ration them out like a little more intelligently than you had to in KNC.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so I want to talk about Card Good Bad for this. It's wild, and we're gonna. I picked this Card Good Bad of Koto Rider just because it's a very good card. I know if you look at like the power players of like the wild meta, right? And one more thing, you don't see a lot of wild cards. I mean, you see some wild cards, but because of the offering rates to KNC, and we're still in the KNC meta, it's not like it's just wild cards everywhere. It's, for the vast majority of the time, standard cards, and then there's like a sprinkle of wild cards here and there because that's how the offering rates work out. So you like North Sea Kraken, we talk about a lot. Zombie Chow, we talk about a lot. Those are your like clear like winners for like top cards. Fel Reaver on the epic side, but the one we don't talk about a lot is Koto Rider. And on average, that's actually rated above cards that people do talk about a lot, like Piloted Sky Golem, which, you know, I keep saying it's not as good as people think it is, and I don't think people believe me. But it definitely has a good chance of totally whiffing, right? Like, and it's a 6 mana 6/4 that does a little something else. It's not that great with the rise in value of neutral cards. But Koto Rider has held up really well because there's no removals, and when there's like fewer removals. So first of all, Koto Rider is always a 2-for-1 if your opponent's using single target removals, because you play it as an 8-drop always, or later, and you play the 3/5, and you use your hero power, and it's 8 mana, and you get 2 3/5s. So unless they have a board clear that deals 5 damage or more, you're going to get a 2-for-1, even though this card has no initiative, as long as you have like a somewhat clear board. And if you actually do have the board, which is going to happen, you know, if you're a good player more often than not, like at any point past turn 8, then you just win the game.
Yeah.
Like, nothing snowballs harder than a Koto Rider, because a Koto Rider gives you 4 mana's worth of stuff every turn. Like, when you normally think snowball, you think like 1 or 2 mana's worth of tempo, or you know, and or also card advantage. Like, you get an extra 1/1 every turn, you get an extra 2/2 every turn, right? And you're like, oh, I'm so
Shrieking
happy.
Shroom.
Yeah, Shrieking Shroom, right? You're like, oh, the snowballs, I just win the game. Koto Rider like seals the game, does not even give your opponent a chance, because you get triple what a Shrieking Shroom will give you. And yeah, it's in the arena right now. So 136 on the tier list. And also, just a plug for our tier list, it's at thelightforge.com. If you haven't been following, definitely check it out for Wild Arena. I want to say like 90% of the wild cards are algorithmed for the latest algorithm, and we've also rebalanced things for the meta, including the biggest move is probably with 3-drops and with board clears. And mass buffs on our side. So everything's been like, I really like where it's at right now. And if you're wondering like what's happening with 3-drops, and you didn't listen to the last Lightforge, 3-drops are better now, or like the existing 3-drops from K and C meta are worth more now than they were before, because they've gotten rid of the clip. And that's definitely been a good drafting point, a good drafting note for you when you're trying to build your curve. So yeah, so definitely check that out. Those are, I think those are pretty good values, and I've been like kind of noticing what cards are performing well and what cards are not performing well, and it lines up with what's on our website. And yeah, so Koto Rider, one of the top cards, 136 in a neutral. It's not a Primordial Drake, but it's pretty much a North Sea Kraken, and it gets really high in some classes, like 149 on Mage, right? Like, that's pretty high.
It definitely makes sense, because the only thing bad about it is that it's a slow card, right? It costs 6 mana, but you really don't want to play it like on turn 6. You really want to play it on turn 8. And for 8 mana, I think you'd gladly take 3/5, 3/5, and 1 damage, right? A ping. And then that's already good enough for 8 mana.
Yep.
And then any upside is just like so good. Ridiculously so.
And the upside is not just any upside, it's an insanely ridiculous upside.
Right. This isn't just like, oh, if I get an upside here, I get like +1/+1,
Yeah.
+2/+2. This is just ridiculous. So yeah, Koto Rider is really, really freaking good. And it's one of those things where, you know, all of the big spells are just a little bit more diluted, right? So that it's, I wouldn't say it's like super easy, but it's definitely easier for Koto Rider to dominate in this wild KNC meta than if we just introduce Koto Rider into the KNC meta.
Yeah, and also easier than in TGT. Like TGT was the snowball meta, but I never remember Koto Rider like being able to dominate as much because there's
Yeah,
still more flipping going on now. And the problem with Koto Rider is that it's hard to flip the Koto Rider, but once you flip, then the Koto Rider wins you the game right after. So
right.
it really takes advantage of everything that's happening in this meta.
Right. And once again, our tier list always reward like, we like cards that reward players for being good,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like with Koto Rider, there are some certain assumptions written into these cards. Like Koto Rider should be better for a good player because the a good player will set up the board that is more favorable for the Koto Rider. So yeah, draft Koto Rider. Enjoy it. I've been beaten by it quite a few times, and the one or two times I've been able to draft it, it's just like easy win past turn 8, unless they're just like dominating the board.
Yep. And on a similar note, like watch out for the piloted guys. They're not that good. I'm looking at the tier list right now. Like in Mage, piloted Shredder is a 130. It's below like 5 neutral cards, like from Violet Teacher to Tomb Spider to Crowd Favorite to Fire Plume to Enhanso. Like piloted Shredder. When we talked about this in the last Lightforge, I don't want to like pound at this point, like beat the dead horse too much.
It's still very good.
It's still very good. 130 is very good for a neutral card, but it's not like just like drop everything else and pick it. A lot of other cards have that potential that they didn't before 7.1.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's it for card good bad. Do we have a question from the GOAT?
Yeah, question from the GOAT is basically, how was your trip, and what was your favorite part of the trip? You've been gone for 2 weeks. There have to be at least one super memorable moment. I'm sure it involves food, but I'll let you talk about it.
I don't know if there's like one super memorable moment, but I went back for Chinese New Year to Mongolia, and then afterwards stopped by Beijing for a couple days before coming back here. And just the food is great. I remember I said this after the podcast last week, so it's not actually on the podcast, but like just my recommendation as someone who loves to eat like liver and heart and all that kind of intestines and all that kind of stuff, right? Like for sheep, for lamb, definitely the kidneys. If you haven't tried lamb kidneys and you're into that stuff, oh my god, lamb kidneys. And I feel like I've been duped my whole life that no one had introduced me to lamb kidneys. Kidneys are not normally what you would go for, right? Even if you are someone who likes like your livers and like your hearts and whatever, just because they're kidneys. And pig kidneys are not that great. Liver kidney, chicken kidneys are like not terribly great. But lamb kidneys, oh my god. And if you're trying to get into this for whatever reason, chicken hearts, pig livers, lamb kidneys, cow intestines. Those are the animals and what you should eat from their guts. So, and if you're wondering what I'm talking about and why I'm making a big deal out of this, because every meal I had some kind of like delicious innards when I was over there, whether it was Mongolia or China. And they're very nutritious. They're very nutritious too if you're looking at it from a health perspective.
Okay, number one rule from the Lightforge should always be never take nutritional advice from Africa.
I mean, they're nutritious in terms of being healthy. I'm very healthy. I'm like almost never sick. Like I expose myself to all sorts of random germs all the time, and I don't get sick. So I think I'm very healthy in that sense.
In some ways, yes. Some people don't get sick very often, but in other ways, like, anyways.
Like in Fallout, there's like a stat called endurance, right? Which is like about how healthy you are, and like part of it is like how many hit points do you have, right? How often can you get shot at and like not die? And like I would be really low on that. I would die pretty easily from getting shot. But the other part is like, how long can you walk in poison before you like take damage, or like what random food can you eat in the wild without cooking it and like be okay? And I would do and like how diseased you would get from this stuff, and I would do very well on that second part of endurance. So like I know you know that whenever I build an RPG character for like the first time in a single player game, I always just like recreate myself and how I view myself. And so my endurance is always like decent, even though you would think that it would be terribly, terribly low.
You would survive that radiation, man.
Mm-hmm. Radiation won't get me.
All right, cockroach ADWCTA, fantastic. Um, yeah, that's basically it. Glad to hear that you had a good time, as evidenced by your weight gain.
5 pounds. Can't argue with that. That's just
Yeah.
objective.
And this is something in which you probably like walked around a lot as well. So that 5 pounds was earned.
I did not walk around a lot at all because it was
Oh, okay,
winter
never
in
mind.
Siberia. So there was
Oh,
very, very little walking around. A lot of staying in the apartment and getting out of the apartment into a car or onto a bus and then going to a restaurant.
well, that's fantastic. Glad you had 2 weeks of that. But now you're back playing Arena, and we have 2 weeks of Arena, and then back to the meta that we all loved.
Yeah, what did you do? Well, what did you
played
do when I
Arena.
was gone?
That was it. Worked and played Arena.
Worked and played
Fantastic.
Arena. Nice. Okay, so that's question from the goat brought to you by our patrons. Patreon.com/grinninggoat.
Yep.
Thank you guys so much for your support. Yeah, I think that's it for this episode. We will. You know what I'm really excited about right now, actually, besides like Wild, which we're gonna play a Paladin run right after this. By the way, I swear I did not rig it because it's one of those things where you have to re-roll, right? Like we do an Arena Coop and then we pick the next class afterwards, but it resets like because of the Wild event. And so, like, I had to go find it afterwards, and that is, and it just rolled Paladin, and we haven't played Paladin a lot, so it's actually the correct one to play next, and so that'll be exciting. What was I saying before I went off this Paladin like tangent?
You weren't saying anything.
I wasn't
really.
saying anything. Oh,
No.
What I'm excited about besides Wild, I think in 2 weeks. They're gonna reveal the next expansion if they do it when they normally do.
Oh yeah, and then we'll have like a month and a half lead up to it, right?
Mm-hmm. And they're gonna reveal it, and then they're gonna say like, "Oh, we're not gonna talk about it for like 3 weeks," and then they're gonna talk about it for 2 weeks, and it's gonna be released the week after that. So to fit their normal release schedule, we're gonna get some expansion news in the next like 2 weeks, and it's gonna be a big expansion because it's going to kick out the whole entire standard set that we currently have, right? No more Old Gods, no more Karazhan, no more whatever the expansion is after Karazhan.
Yep. Sounds good. Looking forward to that.
Yeah. All right. Well, until next time, this is ADWCTA.
This is Merps. Good luck in Wild Arena, guys.
Okay. We are done. I'll by the way, you can send me the audio files. I'll put this one together.